Everybody wants to lead until you have to lead. Leadership, it does cost you. Really good leadership isn't about what it does for you. It's about what are you doing for others. Does the wake of your leadership make people better? If you are doing that, that means it's going to cost you.
Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy. You should, next time we film, you should harmonize with me when I say Breezy.
Really?
Yeah.
That's what we want to do?
Yeah.
All right, got it.
And then we should just play that over and over again in our little intro section.
We never have to do it again. So let's have that thing on loop.
Breezy. No. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Been a little bit busy. I was out last week, so
You were out?
I was out last week because the ACC basketball tournament, and then was in DC. Then came back. My kids had spring break, so I was able to hang and kind of take it light. But now back to the full throes of everything. So yeah, just getting it done.
Anything new you've been reading? Anything
yeah.
you've been thinking about?
Yeah, I actually started the book Hidden Potential by Adam Grant.
Oh, nice.
And it's really good so far. I think Adam does a great job of just, bringing in data to back, things that he really looks deep at issues and things like that. So I think that, especially in the work that we do, I'm constantly looking at how do you develop, how do you make people better, how do you see them grow, and I think he does a good job of giving not only just some data behind it, but actually real practical ways that people, that they grow. And the reason why I was very intrigued by it, I've always liked this stuff, but this idea of hidden potential, I've been, I'm really passionate about secondary cities and also hidden leadership. People who I think have talent and they may not present as like a level 5 leader, but they have like that potential there. And so for me, I'm always about those people who kind of are in those ways. I'm talking about a secondary city, like where I live at, Tallahassee. That's a secondary city. It's a capital. I think it's a very important city, but it's not a LA or New York or Miami or something like that. And then also so when watching and trying to help people who are, maybe those types of leaders well, who kind of get overlooked and they don't, they're not the person with the greatest resume or the person who had all these accolades, but you can just see the hidden potential in there. I just love unearthing that. I feel like I spent a lot of my life doing that. So if I can just keep getting better at that, I want to do that.
Why do you think that secondary cities is something that you're passionate about?
I think for me, it's a lot of kind of my life. I think I was someone who, though I had a really high level talent in basketball, but in everything else, it was kind of like I felt very average. Basketball, I was good, but everything else, I was very average. But come to find out that as those things got unearthed, that I had some actually real potential, probably even higher potential in some of the stuff that I do now than I did playing basketball. Point being is that I care about things that are overlooked. I think there's so much talent that's there. Everybody can go to New York or Miami or LA or whatever. But I'm thinking all these people, I read this one time, is that all the people who go to LA or Miami, New York to make it creative, people come from every place. You know what I mean? You'll meet somebody, they're from Edmond, Oklahoma. You're like, and they're in LA and they're like this super creative. You're like, well, all these places got creatives. All these places have leaders and potential. And so for me, it's like, how do you unearth that in those places to make those places better? Can we start having more hubs of innovation and creativity and mining out real leadership in these types of places? So I think that's why.
Cool. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's fun. How you been?
I've been doing good. Last week I went to the beach.
Yeah, very wide of you. Good job.
I love that's the one thing that I don't like about Tallahassee.
Yeah,
we're so far from the beach. I'm just used to being closer.
Yeah,
and so it's really sad that I look a little frail.
Oh my gosh.
Pasty most of the time.
Oh my gosh. Well, did you have fun though?
I did. I had a lot of fun. Nice. I caught a big fish.
Really?
Yeah. For the record, I don't fish like that. And I didn't grow up fishing. Well, I got a big fish.
Do you know what kind you caught?
No idea.
All right.
I just said, tell me a little real.
Dude, deep sea fishing is the worst for me.
That's where we were like in the middle.
Really?
Yeah, in the middle of the ocean for real.
Deep sea fishing is the worst for me. I feel like
Why?
I'm just feeding fish. I feel like I'm just out there feeding.
Oh, because they just bite the bait off.
And they're like, "You'll feel the tug." I'm like, "Man,
no, I've never felt the tug.
Never felt the tug ever."
That's funny.
Yeah, so I was like, "Dude, I'm just out here. I might as well throw the bait in the water. Let's just save all of us about 5 hours. Let's get back to the house."
That was crazy. No, we're out there. I don't use seafood, but they're actually trying to catch like dinner.
Oh, okay.
That's not me. I'm not a hunter nor a gatherer.
Yeah, no. I'm just gonna slide to let me slide to Publix.
Uber Eats.
Uber Eats for sure. All right, what we got today, Bri?
So something happened this week.
Yeah.
Yesterday specifically, we had a different topic planned, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to just give a real time example to all the things that we talk about, and especially the work that we do, where we kind of teach people how to build their culture organizationally and how to make sure that they guard it.
Yep.
And that doesn't even always go as planned for us because we are people.
Yep.
And we make a lot of mistakes.
Yep.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about an experience that we had recently internally with our staff. So can you share a little bit about what happened?
Yeah. I think what I've been noticing over the last couple months has just been just slippage and standard. And I think that there's so many things that are going on. You know what I mean? There's a few organizations that are underneath our roof. And so, trying to see where culture is at, you have your overall culture, but then, you have like a little bit subcultures but there's a standard. And one of the things that I begin to notice is that overall, just the standard starting to slip. And so for me, I'm naturally want to respond really fast. But also my fault and my flaw sometimes is that depending on what type of headspace I'm in, I can find myself maybe not addressing something when I see it. When I know it's an issue, that I don't address it early enough because I'm just like, sometimes you just feel like the principal that all you're doing, or, you feel like the referee, all you're doing is just calling fouls or strike, or umpire calling strikes or, whatever. And so it was one of those situations to where I kind of, there's another situation, something happened and it was just kind of like the tipping point for me to where I was like, all right, I got to deal with this and talk through it. And so, yeah, that was kind of, to kind of help us figure out what was going on and why.
Okay, so leading up to yesterday, as you were noticing some game slippage, what was going through your mind?
First of all, I was trying to, I know there's a lot going on. So for me, I try to have perspective that there's a lot going on. There are some good things that are happening. And so I think sometimes what I can do is see the good things that are happening, and I don't want to feel like I'm beating everyone up, because I'm like, hey, this is it. Because some of this stuff can be very granular of what I see. So what's going through my mind is like, should I address this? Should I not address this? All right, well, we are doing well. And then on top of that, personally, kind of going through some of my own kind of health challenges or whatever, it's like, having the emotional energy. And so sometimes you can just let those things start to kind of slip. So I begin to see it. That's what's going through my mind. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's just see if it can kind of course correct itself, right? You got a strong culture, it can course correct. And at times it has. There's been times where things have course corrected, or someone else is on our team has stepped in and course corrected. But this time it just kind of kept going, and it kept going. So I was like, okay. And it wasn't anything to where I was like, okay, we're going off the rails. But I'm like, okay, if we don't start doing this, what'll start to happen, it'll erode more. And then it'll be a lot harder to fix, to repair, and kind of go from there.
So you sat on it for 2-3 months.
Yep. So
to me, it sounds like there's more there and why you didn't say something other than the logical, oh, maybe it will get fixed. I feel like there had to be more internal wrestling there, especially from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah. I see it. I want to address it right away. I see things a lot. Almost every day, there can be something I point out. But what I have to try to look at is is this driving values? And I think that's what started to hit me, was that there were little things that were pointing to values, but the last thing kind of pointed to a big tipping point for me of one of our main values. And one of our main values in our organization is development. Like, we really care about seeing people developed. And part of development is not only, I think we would think in development as like, man, helping somebody get better at their job. I think that's part of development. Make sure they have a kind of a career path, and a talent, like a leadership pipeline, stuff like that. But I also think part of development is when you have a culture to where when someone's not holding the standard, that the organization and people in the organization and people who are directly reporting to them, they are actually the ones doing that. Because I feel like what you're doing is you're not developing that person. You're letting them have slippage. You're letting them go down that road. And what you're telling them and what you're telling us is that you don't care enough about that person. And it's a lot of work because, I think that's the thing. Everybody wants to lead until you have to lead. And it's kind of some of the same things for me where I was like, I need to address this because I'm frustrated with everyone because of what I'm seeing, but I'm doing the same thing, where like I'm watching this happen and I'm not addressing people who are kind of like direct reports to me. So, and I'm frustrated because they're not actually addressing things they're seeing. And so I started realizing, I can't expect something that I myself am not doing. So that's kind of what got me moving in that direction. That was kind of what was going through my brain.
Mm-hmm. So basically what happened is we have a 9 a.m. check-in every morning. We all have to show up at 9 a.m. After that, there's very few things throughout the week that we have where everyone is expected to like be in office and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But 9 a.m. check-in is non-negotiable for us. Yep. And we showed up after a week of being mostly remote.
Yep.
With like zero energy.
Yep.
Absolutely. Like majority of the room was sucking every bit of energy out of the room simply from body language.
Yep.
And I think like you said, that was a tipping point of something that you had kind of noticed over a series of months and a series of events. But once that moment happened, I also want to acknowledge that it was pretty quick. Immediately after check-in, you kind of pulled a few of us aside and were like, what's going on?
Yep.
Because I've noticed this is what I've seen, what's going on? And then within the next hour, we have something called Culture Creators where we all get together and we talk about culture, different leadership development topics you want to speak into us. And you changed your topic within about 10 minutes in order to address like the need based off of where we were culturally.
Yep.
And so I do want to, I know I was like hitting on, you waited, this amount of time, but I also want to hit on the fact that you also had the skill that once you realized what it was that you were seeing and how you needed to navigate it, you almost immediately took the step. And I think that's something that we try to teach our clients how to do and give them the confidence to do that you're really skillful at. So can you talk a little bit about how you made that shift so quickly?
Yeah. I think that part of it, sometimes it can come from, I think people say, hey, don't make decisions when you're frustrated or whatever. But I think sometimes like frustration can actually be pointing, you're frustrated about something. The key is like, don't deal with the surface, get to the root of the frustration. And I think how we showed up, again, I'm not a huge remote work guy, but I also understand the times and, I want to be able to give people room. But what I do expect is like, man, you had that. And so I would think, again, part of it was my own false expectations. You get remote work because let me just say this. I know the truth is that like when people say, oh, people do this and they get more refreshed, I don't buy that. I think I've seen people who come in and they work in office and they're super whatever. I just think it's a lot of time perspective. So when I think I had kind of a wrong perspective of kind of how I expect people to come in, but when they in that moment when I saw it, what I realized was that we have stopped the ability where we do deal with a lot of internal stuff. I believe that leadership has to start internally and work your way out, right, from authenticity. Well, one of the things that can happen when you do that is that the internal can become the main thing, where how you feel, what's going on inside, becomes what moves and dictates everything that's going on inside of you, even to the point of your lack of development in other people. And so what I began to realize is that we had lost the ability, some resilience, to actually come in, regardless of how we were feeling, regardless of what's going on, and show up and to bring actual energy. I believe that when you're in an organization, I believe that you have a responsibility to bring energy to that organization. Now, again, some people would argue with that. I don't expect people to care about our organization at the same level that I care about it. I think sometimes, I think bosses are crazy to think that. I'm like, dude, that's not reality. But what I do think is that if you're part of a team, that you come in and you bring your best, but you actually are ready to work. And if you don't enjoy it, I tell people, man, if most of the time you show up and you're just kind of like, oh, I'm like, dude, like no one's holding a gun to your head. Like, go find a job, go find something where you can actually find some excitement and where you could find some joy in what you're doing. But what I've come to realize a lot of times, it has nothing to do with the job. It has to do a lot of times internally what's going on with someone. What I did in that moment was that I recognize that this could be, with having culture creators coming right there, our whole point is addressing culture, leadership development, that this is one of those real-time moments to actually help our team to get better. And so, after sitting with you and Dr. Zoda, again, he has just tons of wisdom. You have a lot of wisdom. Like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. It's like, yeah, I think you should do this, and here's how we should kind of go about it. That was kind of where I was like, all right, I need to go ahead and make that decision, because also I was like, I started thinking about if I was sitting there and I was sitting there observing a client, and I watched that 100%. I would have told
oh, we would eat them up.
Yeah, I would say that, and I'm sitting there looking at myself like, oh yeah, I can't let that go. So.
Yeah. One of the things that we do here, because one of our values is authenticity, is I think we become increasingly aware of the shadow sides of those things.
Yep.
And one of the ones of authenticity, because we highlight self-awareness and healthy emotionality, we have a very high regard for that, because of the way that there's been a disservice to it for such a long period of time, especially in the faith space, is now we find ourselves in a position to use self-awareness as a clutch to support our codependence as leaders, in order to make it seem like we care, because we don't want to, address the things. And I think that when we do that for such a long period of time, you can notice as we all start to slide a little bit. Something that we don't do a very good job at, that we can continue to grow in, is just communicating fast. Because whenever we watch the episode of The Bear, the one where it's I think it's in their last season, and it's their launch day, and they're all in the kitchen, and they're like, there's not a second, there is not a millisecond that somebody is not communicating to somebody else where they are and what they're trying to do next and where they need something to be covered. And with any sports team, communicating is so crucial. When you're on the floor, you speak. At every second, somebody should be speaking. And that's something that we can fault at. That I think that we can continue to grow, and that is something that we really push our clients to do too, is real time. Make sure you're communicating, because the more that you do it, the more that you acknowledge the pitfalls as they're happening, the more comfortable you get over time with acknowledging the pitfalls that are happening. And
I think, you're right. Communication is crucial. I think any great team, I remember Greg Popovich, the coach of San Antonio, says that all the time. He say, championship teams talk. And when you actually, I will never forget going to watch the Golden State Warriors play. And when I was watching them play, and this is when Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, I think this was in their championship run, and I was there, and just being close to the floor and watching those guys, it just nonstop talking. They just nonstop talk. And I think, they were super talented, but they also, we've seen a lot of talented teams that not win, but really good teams communicate. And I think you make a great point. I think that great organizations are consistently communicating. I think they're communicating when you're doing something well. I think you're communicating when something's not going well. You have the ability to confront when it's not, to where it becomes a normal thing to encourage, a normal thing to confront, a normal thing that, man, hey, if you need help, to ask for help. Hey, I'm kind of, I got this deadline that we're trying to hit. I need your help. Is there any way you can give me 30 minutes, 45 minutes? Like today I was working on something, so I reached to somebody on our team and I said, hey, can you come in here with me for 30 minutes, help me process through this? And he came in and we did it, and I was like, oh man, it was super helpful for me today to do that. But I think really good teams are constantly communicating. I agree with you. I think it's something that we have to consistently just keep getting better at.
So when we value authenticity and self-awareness, and then we have something like that check-in where, whatever people are feeling off, and so they come in off, it almost sounds contradicting to say that people can't like show up based off of how they're feeling whenever we say that we value authenticity.
Yeah.
So what role do you think that emotionality plays in authenticity?
I think emotionality plays an important role, because I do think that, first of all, you have to dig through. A lot of times we have, broken, damaged emotions that we have to really work through in order to find really, like I think true, authentic self. I think that's a false narrative of what people have said, though, about like, oh man, showing up to my true self is like how I'm how I'm, feeling that day. That's not real. Like, that's not real life. That's a utopian world. I think that the truth is that I think showing up authentic it's a difference if you're showing up and you're like, you never address what's going on. You're always hiding what's going on. But sometimes, no, like, I believe I'm showing up authentically if I'm struggling and I'm, struggling with depression, right? And I'm not having a great morning. I believe that still showing up and still doing my job and coming in with some level of energy is important. Do I do that perfect every time? No. But the one thing I tell people is this, is that they can see is that when I show up, I'm going to like do my job and do it at a high level, regardless of how I feel. I think that has been a thing that's been lost. It's sometimes to press through those feelings and emotions to get to the other side, because that's where you build like resilience. And honestly, I think joy comes when you're actually able to work through pain and get something done, even though it was incredibly painful. And so that's one of the things, though, we believe and we care tons about authenticity. I actually believe you're not being authentic when you just go by the ways of how you feel, because sometimes, like, you're not feeling great. You're a little bit off. But you know what? That client or that person or your coworker or whoever, they need for you to really show up. You really got to be on your top game. And I think that showing up and really putting energy is incredibly important. And what we never say is that, oh man, never deal with it, just put a fake face on. No.
Right.
We say, hey, we have so many opportunities. I mean, we have a world-class family therapist who's on our staff. There's very few places in the country that actually have that, to where we have somebody that. So, I mean, our team has access to all the stuff. We talk tons about mental health, all those things. So our team has incredible resources to deal with that. But I think that where we're at is that there's a part of growing up to where we got to be able to press through that, because if we can press through that, I think there's going to help be some growth to see people take that next step to that next level.
Yeah, I think that when we understand who people are and we still have an expectation for the level that they are supposed to show up, or when we understand where people are at, how they're feeling, what's going on in their life, and we still have an expectation of how they're supposed to show up regardless, I think that we're actually bringing more freedom to them than we are anything else. Because what we're actually telling them is you can go through these things and you can feel this way and you can still do this excellently. Yep. And we really believe that you have the capacity to do both.
Yep.
When in the history of the world, people have told you to either forget about what's going on and just show up.
Yep.
Or what's happening culturally now is forget about what you have to show up to and just make sure you pay attention to how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that we're actually telling people there's a third way. Like, you really can do both, and we believe in you. And if things go really well, you're going to have even more confidence in yourself. And if things don't go well, we actually have all the tools that are needed to be able to discover greater reasons as to why that might be and how you can continue to show up later.
Yeah, like, I mean, a great example is this. Like, before coming here, my son was, he had called me and he's running track and whatever, and so basketball is his main sport, but he's running tracks, and all that, so he's kind of had little hamstring, calf kind of strain, whatever, just out there doing it. Well, for him, it's like, hey, can I not, it's like, hey, I think I'm trying to, because as soon as he called me, I'm like, all right, he wants something, right? As a parent, always. So I'm like, all right, what does my man want? So anyway, what did he start to, hey, my calf slightly strained, can we go in later and get some shots up? And I was like, nope. I was like, you need to go to your workout at 7:30. Now, whatever you tell, your JT, who's this trainer, I'm like, hey, tell him what you can do, what you can't do, whatever. But like, and here's what I'm trying to teach him, not because I don't care about his calf or anything like that. What I'm trying to teach him is I know it's not like, if it was detrimental or something like that, I'd be like, all right, dude, you don't need to do this. But what I'm trying to teach him is that the consistency of showing up even when you don't feel well, even when you're a little bit, you still need to show up. And I'm trying to teach him that in that moment, is that kind of thing. And I think sometimes as a father, I need to do a better job explaining on the backside of that, of why I do that. But that's my mindset in that. And I think you're right. I believe that as leaders of organizations, we have not done a great job of, I think we have now gotten to a place to where we're not building resilient enough people. And I know people use that word and throw it out there. And resilience is not the lack of feeling stuff. It's the idea of I'm able to bounce back and I have the tools to do that. And I think as leaders, we have to teach people how to have that tool. I think there's stuff you can do talking, but I also think your culture can build that. And so that's the number one thing for me. Our culture has to be the thing that helps people get that. You can do the talking, you can have them read books, you can do whatever, but like, I just think sometimes there's something about that culture that actually raises you up to that level to do it.
How do you think that resilience breeds wisdom?
It's a great question. I think it breeds wisdom because you're able to go through something. And remember, we talk about resilience being able to bounce back. You go through something and you don't allow it to misshape you. Because that whole thing, I've said it many times on here, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is stupid, because it's not true. I mean, we all know people who went through some stuff and they're not the same anymore. It emotionally killed them. You know what I mean? It relationally killed them. But what I believe is that when you can be resilient, what you learn is you go through stuff and then you're able to glean all the stuff from it, good and bad. I mean, like sometimes for me, I am a person, I like to go from one thing to the next thing. But there are a few things in my life to where where I've been doing them for a long time. And I believe it's been a great thing for me because it teaches me to go with it. Because I like new. What's the next new thing? And sometimes you cannot get all the wisdom and all the insight in a situation because I'm so quick to leave. You know what I mean? But I think if you're able to have resilience and get through stuff, you can just mind and grow and get so much stuff out of it. I think we quit things way too easy. Now, again, and this is where people have to understand, it's the wisdom is the road. You know what I'm saying? You have these, you have the ditches on each side. We should live in the middle in wisdom. So, for example, when I talk about quitting, and I'm like, I think we quit too much. Well, then what people will do is go to that way other side. Then you have like the boomer and Gen X and all those people come out and, man, the Vince Lombardi quote, what I'm saying? Quitters, winners never quit, quitters never win. I'm like, that is dumb. That's just stupid. Here's why. Winners quit stuff they suck at all the time. Like, why am I going to sit there? If I'm not good at something, keep doing it, But I also think there's stuff that people when it gets uncomfortable, and then they just don't grow. And I think that's honestly one of the biggest issues we're dealing with right now. I think in leadership in our country is that we don't have people who are willing to go through some stuff in order to have wisdom. That's why you can hear people, there's something about, it's rare when you hear people who've gone through stuff and like you can just feel wisdom. I think we're lacking that because I think people don't want to have the resistance and the resilience to go through the kind of the grind of all of it.
So how do you go through something and allow it to pierce you but not completely kill you?
I think, first of all, you need to know where you're at. Like, is this the right situation that you're supposed to be in? That's the first thing. And a lot of times you just notice that this is an opportunity and you go through it. I think the next thing that you have to do is when you're starting to go through it, you got to notice, are you actually getting better? And what I mean by getting better is it pulling stuff out of you sometimes that may be the ugly parts of you? I was in a situation one time to where I wanted to leave a situation, but I felt like I wasn't supposed to. And on the outside, from a productivity standpoint and everything, people were like, man, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just go do this? But I felt like I was supposed to be there. And what I learned in that moment is I learned so much about honor and respect for somebody. I learned a lot about patience. I learned during that time that it's not about me all the time and what I could go do, but sometimes it's something bigger going on. And so I learned a lot. I probably look back in that moment and I'm telling you, I learned so much. Being in a situation that in today's culture, people would have said was toxic. Mm-hmm. But I learned so much in that situation. I'm forever grateful. But I stayed there because I felt like I was supposed to. That kind of, whatever you want to call it, like your gut, my gut just like, I need to stay there. And so I think that's I would say that's too. You got to like listen to like those instincts in your gut of like, man, I need to stay there. You also have to know yourself. I'm quick to jump out of something. So I'm like, I'm going to more lean toward like, okay, I got to stick it out. Some people, because maybe they're growing up, some of their own codependency, they're going to stay in bad situations. Then what you need to do is like, you may need to think that, and also go talk to somebody. That's why we always say it all the time, have good relationships, because when you have good relationships, friends and people who are very honest with you, people who are seasoned, a little bit older, they can help you know like, yeah, you need to stick that out. Even though you don't want to hear that, you need to stick that out a little bit.
Okay, so maybe there's a day where you wake up and, somebody has said something harsh about you publicly or within certain spheres, and then you're also fighting with your wife, and then one of your kids is sick or wakes up in a mood and you have to take them to school. And then in 30 minutes, you have to have a coaching call with a very high-level client. And maybe within that hour that all those things is happening, that's when you're supposed to prepare for the coaching call with that high-level client.
Yep.
And you also woke up feeling insecure, and then all of these things happening just pushed it even further.
Yep.
So now you're in the pit. What do you, what are the internal structures that you've put in place within your life to allow you to still show up and be present with what it is you promise to bring to, that other person or the other organization, in spite of all these things that's happening, with in mind, like you're still going to deal with those things.
Yep.
But within 30 minutes, I have to be present to take care of somebody else that I have promised to help.
I'm going to come back to like practical things, like leading into it. But this is probably the main thing, actually doing the work. Because what I've learned is in those moments, maybe like I said, my kid and I'm worried about that, or, my wife and I aren't seeing eye to eye on something, and maybe something she said, something I said, or we both said. But normally it's about, and you say I woke up, I was feeling insecure. Normally a lot of times it's about how it's making me feel. It's maybe not so much the situation of like, oh, this person. Yeah, I'm worried about my kid, but it's like, oh man, but honestly, if we're on it, we start going deep within, and we're like, okay, well, yeah, if my kid's sick, okay, I do this, and I kind of have to, take off, or have to, maybe get somebody else to cover for me on this. And I start thinking about that, unless it's like a big, sickness or something like that. But if it's just like a flu or something like that, you're kind of like, you're thinking about how it's going to inconvenience you. And what I've learned, doing the work helps me get out of it. Like actually showing up, because I believe you should sow opposite of what you're feeling. So everything in me in those moments wants to go internal. How do I fix this? What's going on? But I've learned that actually going and when I say serving, or actually sowing out and going and helping someone and doing your job. So you talked about a client call. I feel like, man, going and doing that call, there's been times that's happened. And when I get off the call, I actually feel better, because I've now sowed something opposite of how I felt, because all I want to do is just, man, crawl up, don't want to deal with anybody, sit alone, and feel what I feel. But actually sowing it opposite is really important. That's why I tell people, we miss really good stuff when we allow our bad, damaged emotions to allow us to show up and not be productive. I believe that some of the break through some of the good stuff. I believe some of the wisdom. I believe some of your leadership. I believe some of your kind of growing and trajectory and leveling up is on the other side of showing up and having a good attitude. And you're not being fake. You're not being fake. You're just showing up and saying, you know what, I'm choosing to do this. Even though I don't feel like it, I am choosing to do this because I have to deliver something. And so I would tell you that's one of the most important things. Now, practically, what I can do internally is like, for me, as we've talked about on the podcast, like, I pray. One of the things I've been doing lately is meditation. So I try to sit in like, 10 to 15 minutes. I can do things like that. I think those are some of the practices. So whatever your practices are that you do for like internally for like, like self-development or whatever, I think those things are important. But I would say the most important thing is actually throwing yourself into what you're doing. And like you said it best, not dealing with it, but in those moments, that's some of the best things you can do to actually help you get better.
Would you say that those are the times where you feel the cost of what you believe you're supposed to do the heaviest?
Yeah, for sure. Because you realize that leadership, it does cost you. Because you really think about it, really good leadership isn't about what it does for you. It's about what are you doing for others. Like, does your vortex, the wake of your leadership make people better? And so because of that, if you are doing that, that means it's going to cost you. So you feel it. Because I know if I don't show up for this client, who may be, a client that's one of our, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a high-paying client or, one of our lower-end clients. But the bottom line is that if I don't do what I need to do there and I don't show up, what happens? What happens if that was just the moment for them where they're like, all right, man, I really needed you that day and you didn't show up? What if before I got on that call, they had the same morning I had that I did, and now they need to be the person. Like, I need you to be the one to help me navigate through this stuff. How am I going to go lead today, and so on and so forth. And what if they, and all of a sudden, like, they could move on from you, move on with being a client? Then what does that do? That impacts you. That impacts people on our team. Jobs, all that stuff. So I think that, yeah, you do feel the cost in that moment that I don't have time in that moment to deal with it. Again, I want to be very clear, and I think that for those who listen to the pod who are younger, like, I need for you to get this, and like, if you can get this in your tool belt, it's like so much free game. Is that if you can learn to just put things in a box and do things, put your feelings in a box and go get your job done, and then when you're off, or then during your lunch break, go back, man, what was I feeling right there? What was happening with me? Why was I so this? And process it there. But like, sometimes it just builds something in you to when you can just do that and still go and show up and move. I think that is where, again, I go back to that's where athletics was so important for me, because I was just, and being around it my entire life. And even now, like, you see it all the time. We're like, yeah, things don't go well, but you're like, oh yeah, I still got to show up. Like, I still got to perform. Like, performance matters, I learned that at a young age, man. Production matters. And so regardless of how you feel, you got to produce.
What about the times where, whether it's external or internal pressures have happened and it's time for you to show up, and before you did, in your head, you're contemplating like, maybe I shouldn't do this. Like, maybe these things have pushed me in such a state where I just shouldn't do this. You decide to do it anyways. You do it bad. And then after the fact, how do you do the autopsy of that situation, one? Yep. And how do you not allow that situation to shape whether you decide to show up or not in future situations?
I think it's being curious and compassionate. The way you do autopsy always of a situation is being curious and compassionate. I think you have to be curious of what went on, and then when I say being compassionate, don't judge yourself. And what I mean by judge yourself is like, you already feel bad. This wasn't your best performance. Okay. But now learn from it. Because if you're just judging yourself like, oh my God, I suck. I can't believe I did that. I should have never had that conversation. See, this is what's going to happen. And then you go down this whole road, man, they're going to get rid of me. I'm going to get fired. All the stuff. You can't learn. So you have to be curious and willing to lean into it and realize that, man, just because you had one moment like that does not define you. I think that's the other thing too. One moment does not define who you are. 5 moments don't define who you are. I think we have so many different moments to where we've done well. And I think you need to look at those, but also in the same breath, like, okay, this is where I could have got better here. I should have done this, man. When I was in there, I wasn't as prepared as I needed to be. Okay, so then what do I do next in this moment? Okay, next time if I'm in that moment and what I didn't do well is because I wasn't prepared, that I have to then make that note to say, okay, next time if a moment happens where I'm not doing great, the most important thing for me, it may not be my meditation in that moment. It may not be my reading in that moment. It may be for me to say, I've got to make sure that I'm able to look and I have all the proper information for that call, review my notes, make sure that presentation I'm giving, that I got those notes super tight to make sure that's happening, is being done well. So I think that's how you have to do it. You got to be curious and you got to be compassionate. And I think that translates in almost in anything in life, a relationship. I think, man, what went good, what went bad, I think also another thing would be when you actually do that call and you kill it. Man, what did I do? What did I say? How did I feel? How did I start the call off? Maybe you started off, you felt like crap, but you started the call off with like big energy for whatever reason, right? And that was like, man, it got the client. It was like, oh, it's great. And it got you going. Or man, maybe you asked them what was going on with them. I mean, whatever that is. Or again, I started this presentation this way. I walked into a meeting and I decided in that meeting, though I'm not leading the meeting, I decided to go in the meeting and say hi to every person that walked in the room. I went in and I kept helped push the energy up. And man, everybody's like, oh man, that was great. And you felt better. Go evaluate it. Again, curious and compassionate, doing the autopsy is so important.
I need you to like clip that section so that way the next Sunday when you wake up and you're like, and then you communicate, and then after you're like, this is the worst thing ever. Just listen to your own voice.
Doing that? Oh my God.
Well, something else that we talked about too yesterday was kind of the power, and what we've already talked about a little bit, is like the power in accepting your limitations, because it allows you to show up with more freedom and a lot more fully.
Yep.
And one of the examples you mentioned was how, like, part of what makes you who you are is that you'll never be satisfied.
Yep. And
the shadow to that is that you will not be content. Yep. And the people who have really have a lot of relational intimacy with you are going to feel the effects of that.
Yep.
And with that in mind, how do you know that you are accepting the right limitations for yourself? Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, how do you know if you're being like delusional?
Yeah. I think that you have to, we've talked about it on so many different of these pods of like, you got to do the hard work of knowing yourself, and so there's plenty of tools that are out there to do that. Also, we talked about sovereign themes before, the ability to go back. That's places you find yourself even when you're not trying to find yourself. It's really knowing like that, but also it's knowing like it is doing the emotional work. So for me, I just know those parts about me. I know that I'm like never really content. So what does that look like? That looks like I'm always seeing the things that could get better. The dark side of that is like, man, you could always be not in a happy place. The good side of that, you're always going to make things better. How you balance that tension of that is knowing like, man, of seeing the highlights of what we do, when we're doing something really well, and make sure I'm purposely saying that a lot. But then also when I feel like I need to communicate, I do that. And also I think you got to have people around you who will really tell you the truth. Like, I think that's super important. I think you have to have people around you that'll tell you the truth. Now, it doesn't matter where you fit in the organization, if it's a coworker, if you're a leader, and it's direct reports. Do you have other colleagues who can really tell you the truth and speak to you? I think that's one of the greatest ways to save from being delusional, is actually having other people that you actually give access to help you think through that.
Do you feel like you ever really finish grieving the fact that you don't feel contentment frequently?
No, I actually, let me go ahead. I think that I have grieve that this is kind of how I am, right? Like I was talking about it this morning. I know this. Sadness will be just a part of my life. And I've come to be okay with that. And so now what I've done is that being able to recognize that instead of just looking for some utopian world one day. But sadness can't stop me from doing what I feel I'm supposed to do. It's a part. And matter of fact, sadness has actually helped me understand humans way better. It's helped me understand how to communicate and help people, who are in certain situations. I can understand where humans are landing and what they're processing and things like that because of my own personal struggles or whatever. So it's actually been a tool of mine instead of me trying to run from it. Now, again, you have to be careful with that and in proper perspective, but I think that I'm getting to a place of being okay with it, of settling with certain things, of sadness, contentment, whatever, of just kind of doing that. And so I think that it can help, but I also think, it's just sometimes you got to grieve it.
Yesterday at the end of Culture Creators, our takeaway was to think about how we're going to show up this week and why. What was yours?
Mine is really showing up and being me more. And what I mean by that is that I fall so much into the trap of wanting to just be like worshipped. And I know when people hear that sounds narcissistic, but like all humans are this way. Like it's just you put on different fronts of your narcissist or you're wanting people to worship you. But and what I mean by that is at times I just don't want to be the guy. I don't want to be the guy who's always critiquing everything that we're doing, right? But I've realized in understanding the season that we're in, I'm going to have to do that a little bit more. So I have to show up more, like being me. Today I was on a call with a client. And as I was talking to this client, I was like, oh, man, like, you start talking about, I love what I do, but I hate talking about pricing and stuff like that. That's why you're here, because like you absolutely, I would give everything away for free.
Oh my gosh. Or it's like suddenly there's 5 other deliverables added to it. And it's like, wait, no.
Yeah. And so, but today I was like, nope, like, from the jump, I was like, hey, this is what, kind of start knowing that this is what it's going to kind of be, whatever. And for me, that's me showing up, being me, not because deep inside why I don't want to do that is because because this is what I realized. What if I actually tell you that? I tell you what the price is and you say no. Deep inside, I feel like you're rejecting me. Mm-hmm. So that's why I've realized why. I'm like, because why do I struggle? Because I say hard stuff all the time. Why do I struggle when it comes to pricing? And I think at times it's like, man, 1, do I see myself as valuable enough? 2, if I do this and then you don't accept that or you feel, oh, man, that's way too much. What does that speak about me? Well, I just rather you be, just let me work with you. And it ends up being me like for people like, oh, let me just be the person working with you. And I'm like, what am I doing? And so that's so to answer that, that's a practical way. But this week is just showing up, being more of myself. And what I mean by that is just being very clear and very direct. Again, my whole theme this year is clarity wears the crown. And so I was reminded of that in that meeting of that, though that was, and I started off the first couple months, I think really like doing that, but I do feel like the last few weeks I've kind of like slipped in that of just the directness and clarity of like, nope, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is the direction we're headed in. And this is what I expect. And so I think that's one of the ways. What about you?
For me, I'd probably say 2 different things. The first one is that what I can slowly start to do is I will like a lot better than what it used to be, but I will like slowly drift into learned hopelessness, which is basically a mindset of I don't believe that I can be a change agent. Like whatever I see, I'm either seeing it wrong or I'm seeing it correctly, and there's no way that I can change it. Yeah. And so between the 2, I kind of it makes me not carry my weight. It makes me not take on the responsibility that I am supposed to carry in the rooms that we're in. So even in little things like check-in or some of the other situations you mentioned, it's like, well, there was a level of engagement that I should have and could have had that I didn't do because that's where like my course correction starts to sit is
Yeah.
over time I will start to like lack levels of believability. And then because of that, I don't want to say not pay attention to my surroundings because I see it. It's the say something that I can lack in at times or respond as quickly as I see it, because I'll kind of be similar where I'm like, I have to see it for like 3 months. And then I'm like, okay, now I think that I'll say something about it. Even though I feel it with the level of intensity inside. The second thing was I don't communicate or allow what I'm thinking about to shape the way that I interact with people enough in comparison to what it is that I think about and how it would actually be helpful to the people that I'm with.
Gotcha.
I think a lot of the times when I just talk to people like, hey, when you said this, it made me think about this thing, or hey, you mentioned this and I wanted to tell you, what it reminded me of. Whenever I do that, usually people like a few days later will be like, hey, when you said that thing, like it really propelled me forward and something that I've been thinking about for a lot of times, or I didn't think about it that way. And so it's altered my perspective. And I have that kind of stuff going on in my head, I think pretty frequently, but I just don't, it's part of it. I just don't acknowledge it because it's part of believing that I can actually like be a change agent. And what it goes down to is caring a lot more about how I'm perceived than I care about the other person being impacted. And so that was another thing, was making sure that I'm more consciously aware of what it is that I'm thinking about and how I can be impactful to the people that I'm leading or the people that I find myself around on a pretty consistent basis. Yeah.
And I think the one thing that, that I would say that you do a good job of in our organization is you help us be reminded a lot of like, okay, this is what we're focusing on. Like, like the whole thing, like, this whole thing of being vibrant change agents, right? And you constantly say that, hey, we're supposed to be vibrant,
vibrant architects of a new reality.
Yeah, vibrant architects of a new reality. And it's like, okay, we're called to be these vibrant architects of a new reality. But then we're showing up and we're not vibrant. You know what I'm saying? We're like dull. You're like, all right, well, how are we doing this? What does this make sense? And so I think that part's really, I think you do a really good job of helping people see that and do that. And so, but again, it's just that whole thing of us as an organization and people, everyone has to carry the weight in the culture of it, and you have a responsibility. And I think that's really important for everyone to hear. If you're working for an organization, it's very easy to always look at the top and say they're responsible for culture. Culture is that thing that everybody always looks at and doesn't know whose responsibility it is. You know what I mean? They're like, man, our culture bad. So you know how it is. Then we have like organizations like where the leadership team blames everybody who they're working for. They don't look at themselves. No one ever really looks at themselves like, you know what? Our culture sucks because, it's on me. It's always like, well, if we had, people did this, or if it was this, or, leadership, or, if you're in leadership, the employees. I'm just like, no, you're responsible. You're responsible for the culture. And I think if you start taking that responsibility, I think you can make culture so much better. Well, guys, hey, I hope today was helpful, and I hope you got to see in real time the idea of being able to get into a situation to be able to address it. What I want to leave you with is this. You got to see and hear today in real time about a situation of culture slippage, right? We talk tons here about authentic leadership and authentic culture, and that's really the part of this podcast, is helping people write new rules to be these authentic leaders. But it needs to be out of who you are. When I'm the best version of myself, I'm very clear and I'm very direct. For some people, they have a different approach, and I think you need to be that. But it's very important that when you're doing that you actually are checking, why are you doing that? So if you are someone who's leading an organization, or you have a team of people and you're not seeing things in culture, before you go and address it, you got to say, why am I addressing this? What am I seeing? And first and foremost, I hope what you heard from me is I had to look internally first, because the things I was seeing in the organization at times I was doing. And so I start with me, but just because it deals with me does not mean you should not address it, because I'm not the only one who's building culture. And so just make sure that you evaluate yourself and then be able to evaluate the organization. Until next time, keep writing new rules.